Thanksgiving dinner, 2024. My husband Caleb stands up, raises his wine glass, and announces to our entire family that he's going to be a father. My heart stopped. After 2 years of fertility treatments, countless negative pregnancy tests, and sleepless nights wondering if we'd ever have kids, I thought this was finally it. I thought he was about to tell everyone I was pregnant, but I wasn't. The woman sitting directly across from me, his co-worker Tenley, started rubbing her belly with this smug little smile. That's when I realized my perfect marriage was built on lies. The camera opens on a beautifully decorated Thanksgiving table with golden autumn leaves, flickering candles, and perfectly arranged dishes. Family photos line the mantel, showing what appears to be a happy couple through the years. The mood shifts dramatically as we see close-ups of shocked faces, dropped silverware, and hands gripping the table. Let me introduce you to the players in this disaster. There's me, Brinley Ashford, 32 years old, marketing director at a Fortune 500 company, and apparently the most naive wife in Colorado. I'd been married to Caleb Reed for 6 years. He's 34, works in software engineering, and has this charming smile that used to make me melt, but now makes my skin crawl. Then there's Tenley Cross, 28, Caleb's co-worker who I'd met maybe 3 times before that night. She had this bubbly personality that I always found slightly annoying, but I figured that was just jealousy since she got to spend more time with my husband at work than I did at home. Also at this dinner from hell were my sister, Everin, who's 29, and has always been my voice of reason, and Caleb's parents, Mira and Tobin Reed, who treated me like the daughter they never had. These people weren't just witnesses to what was about to unfold, they were my family, my support system, and Caleb was about to blow up all of our lives in the span of 30 seconds. But here's what Caleb didn't know. While he was planning his big announcement, I was sitting there with a manila folder hidden in my purse. A folder that contained evidence that would destroy not just his announcement, but his entire world. You see, I'd been suspicious for weeks, and when a woman's intuition kicks in, she doesn't just sit around feeling sorry for herself. She gets answers. And the answers I found were about to turn this Thanksgiving dinner into the most satisfying moment of revenge I've ever experienced. What happened next lasted maybe 5 minutes, but it felt like hours. It was the kind of moment that splits your life into before and after. Before, I was the trusting wife who believed every excuse and late night at the office. After, I became the woman who learned that sometimes the best way to handle betrayal isn't to scream or cry. Sometimes it's to smile, stand up, walk to your purse, and deliver the kind of justice that makes people stop talking about turkey and start talking about truth. Let me take you back to where this story really begins, because the betrayal didn't start that Thursday evening. It had been building for months, maybe even years, and I was too trusting to see the signs that were right in front of my face. 6 months before that disastrous Thanksgiving, my life looked perfect from the outside. I had everything I thought I wanted: a successful career as marketing director at Henderson & Associates, one of Denver's top consulting firms, a beautiful Victorian house in the Highlands neighborhood that I'd inherited from my grandmother, Rose, complete with original hardwood floors and a wraparound porch that made every neighbor jealous. And Caleb, my husband of 6 years, who I'd met in college and fallen head over heels for during our senior year. Caleb worked as a software engineer at TechFlow Solutions, and he was good at his job. Really good. He had this analytical mind that could solve any problem, which is probably why I never questioned his explanations for things that didn't add up. When he said he was working late on a critical project launch, I believed him. When he claimed his phone died during those long evenings at the office, I bought him a portable charger. When he started coming home smelling like unfamiliar perfume, he convinced me it was just the new air freshener they'd installed in the office building. Looking back, I realize I was the perfect victim for his deception. I wanted our marriage to work so desperately that I ignored every red flag and made excuses for behavior that should have sent me running. We'd been trying to have a baby for 2 years, and the fertility treatments were taking their toll on both of us emotionally and financially. The hormone injections made me moody and exhausted. The monthly disappointments when those pregnancy tests came back negative left me feeling broken and inadequate as a woman. Caleb started pulling away during this time, and I blamed myself. I thought maybe I was too focused on getting pregnant, too emotional, too needy. He'd always been charming and social, but suddenly he was working late, 3 or 4 nights a week. Weekend projects at the office became routine. He started going to happy hours with coworkers that somehow lasted until midnight. When I suggested joining him sometime, he'd say it was just boring work talk and I wouldn't enjoy it. The financial strain was real, too. Fertility treatments aren't cheap, and our insurance only covered a portion of the costs. I was using my inheritance money from my grandmother to pay for procedures while also supporting Kylem's student loan payments and covering most of our household expenses. He always promised he'd pay me back when his next promotion came through, but that promotion never seemed to materialize. My sister Evren started asking questions around this time. She'd always been protective of me, and she noticed things I was too close to see. She pointed out that Kalem seemed distracted during family gatherings, always checking his phone and making excuses to step outside for important calls. She mentioned that he'd stopped talking about our future the way he used to, stopped making plans for vacations or home improvements or anything that required thinking beyond the next few weeks. The house became my sanctuary during this difficult period. I'd inherited it free and clear from Grandmother Rose, and keeping it in my name had been a practical decision that ended up being the smartest thing I ever did. Kalem had pushed for us to refinance and add his name to the deed, claiming it would help with his credit score and our tax situation. Something in my gut told me to wait, to keep things as they were until we were in a better place financially and emotionally. Thank God I listened to that instinct. During those long evenings when Kalem was supposedly at the office, I found myself walking through the house, touching the furniture and photographs that connected me to my family's history. Grandmother Rose had been a strong woman who'd raised 3 children on her own after my grandfather died young. She'd built a successful catering business and always told me to trust my instincts about people. I could almost hear her voice during those quiet moments, warning me that something wasn't right. The breaking point came in early October when I found a pregnancy test in our bathroom trash. My heart soared for about 10 seconds before I realized the timing was all wrong. I hadn't taken a test in over a month, and this one was buried under other garbage like someone had tried to hide it. When I asked Kalem about it, he looked genuinely confused and suggested maybe our cleaning lady had used our bathroom. It was a reasonable explanation, except our cleaning lady was 65 years old and definitely not sexually active. That night, lying next to my sleeping husband, I made a decision that would change everything. I was done being naive. I was done making excuses and ignoring my instincts. If Kalem was hiding something, I was going to find out what it was. I had no idea that my investigation would lead to the most shocking Thanksgiving dinner in family history. The week leading up to Thanksgiving should have been filled with excitement and preparation, but instead it felt like walking through a minefield while pretending everything was normal. I had invited Kalem's parents, Mira and Tobin, along with my sister Evren, for what I thought would be a cozy family dinner. What I didn't expect was for Kalem to casually mention on Tuesday that he'd invited Tenley Cross because she had nowhere else to go for the holiday. "She's new to Denver and doesn't have family here," he explained while scrolling through his phone, not even looking up at me. I thought it would be nice to include her. I should have trusted my immediate reaction, which was a sharp stab of discomfort in my chest. Instead, I smiled and said it was thoughtful of him to think of a lonely coworker. After all, I'd always prided myself on being the kind of person who welcomed strays during the holidays. But something about the way he said her name, so casually familiar, made my skin crawl. I knew Tenley peripherally from the few company events I'd attended with Kalem. She was one of those women who seemed to sparkle in any room she entered, with perfectly styled blonde hair and a laugh that carried across crowded spaces. She was younger than me, maybe 5 or 6 years, and had that effortless confidence that made everyone want to be around her. The few times we'd spoken, she'd been friendly enough, but there was something about her smile that never quite reached her eyes when she looked at me. Thanksgiving morning arrived with that crisp November air that makes Denver feel magical. I spent hours in the kitchen preparing Grandmother Rose's famous sage stuffing recipe and getting the 20-pound turkey perfectly golden brown. Kalem was unusually helpful, setting the table with our good china and arranging the fall centerpiece I'd bought from the farmer's market. He seemed nervous, constantly checking his phone and looking out the window like he was expecting someone. Mira and Tobin arrived first, bringing their traditional green bean casserole and warm hugs. They'd always treated me like family, and Mira had been especially supportive during our fertility struggles. She'd share stories about her own challenges getting pregnant with Calum, always ending with reassurance that our time would come. Tobin was quieter but equally kind, always asking about my work and remembering details from previous conversations. Evren showed up next with her contribution of homemade cranberry sauce and her usual sharp observations. She pulled me aside in the kitchen while I was basting the turkey and whispered, "You seem tense. Everything okay?" I wanted to tell her about my growing suspicions, about the pregnancy test I'd found, about the way Kylam had been acting lately. Instead, I just said I was stressed about hosting and wanted everything to be perfect. She gave me that look that meant she didn't believe me but wouldn't push the issue in front of everyone else. When Tenley arrived, everything shifted. She walked through my front door like she owned the place, immediately complimenting the decorations and asking if she could help with anything. She was wearing a fitted burgundy dress that showed off what I now realize was a small but noticeable baby bump. At the time, I thought she just gained a little weight, which seemed normal for someone who'd recently moved to a new city. What bothered me most was how comfortable she seemed in my home. She knew where to find the serving spoons without asking. She commented on the family photos on our mantel, like she'd seen them before. When she offered to help in the kitchen, she opened the right cabinets on the first try to find glasses and napkins. Most telling of all, she and Calum had this easy rhythm, like they'd done this dance many times before. During cocktail hour, I watched them interact while trying to maintain conversations with Mira and Evren. Calum would catch Tenley's eye across the room and smile in a way that made my stomach turn. She'd laugh at his comments, a little too loudly, touch his arm when she passed by him, and reference inside jokes that clearly excluded everyone else in the room. "Calum told me so much about this beautiful house," Tenley said while admiring the crown molding in the dining room. "He's so proud of the work you've done here." The way she said it made me realize that Kylam had been talking about our home, our private space, our intimate details with this woman who was essentially a stranger to me. It felt like a violation, like she'd been living in my marriage without my knowledge. As we sat down for dinner, I noticed Calum kept checking his phone and seemed jittery. Tenley was glowing in that way that I'd always imagined pregnant women glowed, and she kept placing her hand on her stomach in a protective gesture. The pieces were falling into place, but I still couldn't believe what I was seeing. That's when Kylam stood up with his wine glass, and everything I thought I knew about my life exploded into a million pieces. The moment Calam's words hit the air, something cold and calculating took over my mind. While everyone else at the table was processing the shock, I was already 3 steps ahead, my brain working like the strategic marketing professional I'd trained myself to be. The difference was, this time I wasn't selling a product or managing a campaign. I was about to execute the most important presentation of my life. I excused myself to the bathroom, my legs somehow steady despite feeling like my entire world had just collapsed. As I walked down the hallway, passing the family photos that now felt like monuments to a lie, I could hear the awkward murmur of voices behind me. Evren was asking pointed questions. Mira sounded confused and hurt. Tobin was demanding explanations that Calum clearly wasn't prepared to give. In the bathroom, I gripped the marble countertop and stared at my reflection. The woman looking back at me had the same face, the same dark hair pulled back in an elegant bun, the same burgundy lipstick I'd carefully applied that morning, but her eyes were different. They belonged to someone who'd just been pushed too far and was ready to push back twice as hard. The manila folder in my purse wasn't an accident. I'd been carrying it with me for 2 weeks, ever since my private investigator had delivered his final report. Marcus Chen was a former police detective who specialized in matrimonial investigations, and I'd hired him after finding that pregnancy test in our trash. What started as a simple request to follow my husband had turned into something much more complex and devastating than I'd ever imagined. The investigation began in late October, when I finally admitted to myself that Calam's behavior couldn't be explained by work stress or my fertility treatments. Marcus was professional and discreet, never making me feel foolish for wanting answers to questions I was afraid to ask. His first report came back within a week, confirming that Kaylam was indeed having an affair with Tenley Cross. The photos were painful but not surprising. Dinners at romantic restaurants, walks through City Park holding hands, entering her apartment building together on multiple occasions. But Marcus kept digging because something didn't feel right about the timeline. Tenley had been claiming she was 3 months pregnant, which would put conception right around the time her relationship with Kaylam began. However, her medical records told a different story. Marcus had connections who could access information that revealed Tenley had been pregnant for nearly 5 months, which meant the baby couldn't possibly be Kaylam's. The real breakthrough came when Marcus followed Tenley to a prenatal appointment where she met with a man named Jackson Palmer. Through surveillance and public records searches, Marcus discovered that Jackson was Tenley's actual boyfriend of over 2 years. They lived together in an apartment across town, and according to neighbors, they'd been planning this pregnancy for months. What Marcus uncovered next was the most shocking part of all. This wasn't Tenley's first time running this particular scam. She had a pattern of targeting married men who were financially stable and emotionally vulnerable. Her method was sophisticated and cruel. She'd identify men whose wives were struggling with fertility issues, build relationships with them during their most vulnerable moments, then fake a pregnancy timeline that would make them believe they were the father. She'd extract money for medical expenses, rent assistance, and baby preparations before eventually disappearing when the truth became impossible to hide. Marcus found evidence of at least 2 other men who'd fallen victim to Tenley's scheme in other cities. One had lost over $30,000 before his wife discovered the truth. Another had left his family entirely, only to find out months later that Tenley had vanished with another man's child. The pattern was always the same. Find a man whose marriage was under stress, offer him the excitement and attention he wasn't getting at home, then manipulate his emotions and finances until there was nothing left to take. What made this discovery even more painful was realizing how perfectly Kaylam fit her victim profile. His wife was struggling with infertility, he had access to a jointly owned home that could be leveraged for money, and his emotional state made him desperate for someone who made him feel desired and successful. Tenley had played him like a violin, and he'd been too flattered and desperate to see through her performance. The folder contained everything: surveillance photos, financial records showing the money Kaylam had been giving Tenley, medical documentation proving the pregnancy timeline was impossible, and most damaging of all, a signed confession from Jackson Palmer. Marcus had approached Jackson with evidence of the scam, and surprisingly, Jackson had been eager to cooperate. He was tired of being Tenley's accomplice and wanted out of the scheme that had consumed their relationship. As I walked back toward the dining room, I felt a strange sense of calm wash over me. For the first time in months, I knew exactly what was happening and exactly what I needed to do. Kaylam and Tenley thought they were in control of this narrative, but they had no idea that I'd been writing a different ending to this story for weeks. I walked back into that dining room like I was stepping onto a stage where I'd rehearsed my lines 1,000 times. The conversation stopped the moment I appeared, and I could feel everyone's eyes on me as I made my way back to my seat. Kaylam looked relieved to see me, probably thinking I'd gone to cry or compose myself like the good little wife he expected me to be. Tenley was practically glowing with satisfaction, her hand still resting protectively on her stomach. They both looked so pleased with themselves, so confident in their performance. "I'm sorry about that," I said, settling back into my chair with a serene smile. "I was just so overcome with emotion. This is such wonderful news." Kaylam reached for my hand across the table, and it took every ounce of self-control I had not to pull away. "I know this is a lot to process, Brinley. I wanted to tell you privately first, but Tenley thought it would be special to share it with the whole family." Of course she did. Tenley wanted witnesses to this moment, people who would remember her victorious announcement. She wanted to humiliate me in front of the people I loved most, to mark her territory and establish her dominance. What she didn't realize was that she'd just given me the perfect audience for what was about to happen. "Actually," I said, standing up slowly and smoothing down my dress, "this timing is absolutely perfect. I have a surprise of my own to share." I walked over to where I'd left my purse on the kitchen counter, my heart pounding but my hands steady. Behind me, I could hear Evren's sharp intake of breath. She knew me well enough to recognize the tone in my voice, the calm before the storm that meant someone was about to get destroyed. "You see," I continued, pulling the manila folder from my purse and walking back to the table. "I've been keeping a little secret, too." Mira looked confused, tilting her head like she was trying to understand what was happening. Tobin had set down his wine glass and was watching me with the focused attention of someone who sensed drama approaching. Evelyn was leaning forward in her chair, and I caught her eye for just a moment. The look she gave me was pure pride mixed with anticipation. I placed the folder on the table directly in front of Calum, but I didn't sit down. Instead, I remained standing, positioning myself where everyone could see my face and hear every word clearly. "Calum, you're absolutely right. You are going to be a father." I paused, letting that statement hang in the air just long enough for hope to flicker across his features. "But according to this paternity test and medical timeline, that baby isn't yours." The silence that followed was deafening. I watched Calum's face go through a series of emotions: confusion, disbelief, and then the dawning horror of realization. His hands shook as he opened the folder and began flipping through the contents. "What the hell is this?" Tenley's voice had lost all its sweetness, becoming sharp and defensive. "These are photos of you with Jackson Palmer, your actual boyfriend of 2 years, I said, my voice never wavering. "These are your real medical records showing you're 5 months pregnant, not 3. This is documentation of the money you've been stealing from my husband. And this," I pulled out a single sheet of paper, "is a signed confession from Jackson, admitting to your little scam." Tenley shot to her feet so fast her chair nearly tipped over. "This is insane. You're making this up because you're jealous." "I'm jealous?" I actually laughed, and the sound was so cold it seemed to freeze everyone at the table. "Tenley, I know about Marcus Rodriguez in Phoenix and David Kim in Seattle. I know this is the 3rd time you've run this exact con on married men whose wives were struggling with fertility. I know you and Jackson have been planning this baby and this scam for months." Quaylam was staring at the confession letter, his face growing paler by the second. "This says you've been living with him the entire time we've been together. It says this was all planned." "Quaylam, don't listen to her," Tenley pleaded, but her voice had taken on a desperate edge. "She's trying to break us up because she can't handle losing you." "The beautiful part about this," I continued, "is that I didn't even have to work very hard to catch you. You got so comfortable, so confident in your performance that you started making mistakes, like knowing where everything was in my kitchen, like referencing conversations you could only have had if Quaylam was sharing intimate details about our life together." Mira gasped audibly. "You mean this whole thing is fake?" "Not just fake, Mira. It's criminal. Fraud, extortion, emotional manipulation." I turned back to Tenley, who was now backing toward the door. "The really sad part is how easy it was for you to manipulate someone who was already broken." Calum was so desperate to feel wanted, so tired of dealing with my fertility struggles, that he walked right into your trap. "This is crazy," Tenley said, but she was already reaching for her purse. "I don't have to listen to this." "You're right, you don't," I agreed. "But Calum does, because there's one more surprise in that folder. 6 months have passed since that Thanksgiving dinner, and I'm sitting here in my grandmother's house, the same house where everything fell apart and everything began again. The sunlight streaming through the kitchen windows hits the same hardwood floors, but everything feels different now, lighter. Like a weight I didn't even realize I was carrying has finally been lifted. The immediate aftermath of that dinner was chaos, but the kind of chaos that clears the air like a thunderstorm. Tenley bolted from the house before dessert was even served, literally running out the front door when she realized her scam had been completely exposed. She didn't even try to defend herself once Jackson's confession was read aloud. Calum sat there in stunned silence, holding those papers like they contained his death sentence. In a way, they did contain the death of the man he thought he was. The most surprising reaction came from Mira and Tobin. Instead of defending their son or making excuses for his behavior, they were furious with him. Mira actually started crying, not for the situation, but because she realized how much pain I'd been going through while their son was living a double life. Tobin, who rarely raised his voice, told Calum he was ashamed of him and demanded he pack his things that night. They apologized to me repeatedly, and we've maintained a relationship that's stronger now than it ever was when I was married to their son. Evren's reaction was exactly what I expected. She helped Caleb load his belongings into his car while making cutting remarks about karma and justice. She'd moved in with me temporarily to help with the emotional transition, but also because she said watching me reclaim my power was the most inspiring thing she'd ever witnessed. Having her support during those first few weeks was invaluable. The legal consequences for Tenley were swift and severe. Marcus had documented everything so thoroughly that the district attorney's office was able to build a solid case for fraud and extortion. It turned out she'd stolen over $40,000 from Caleb through various fake medical expenses and emergency requests. She was also wanted in 2 other states for similar schemes. The baby was born healthy 3 months later, and Jackson, who had cooperated fully with authorities, got custody while Tenley faced prison time. Caleb tried to reconcile with me multiple times over those first few months. He sent flowers, wrote long letters explaining how lost he'd been, and even showed up at my workplace begging for another chance. But seeing him clearly for the first time, without the fog of love and hope clouding my judgment, I realized I didn't miss him at all. I missed the idea of him. The life I thought we were building together, but not the actual man who could be so easily manipulated into betraying everything we'd built. The most unexpected blessing came through my fertility support group. While I was dealing with my divorce proceedings, I met someone who changed my perspective on everything. Dr. Nathan Cross, a reproductive endocrinologist who volunteered his time with our group, was kind and patient and made me laugh during some of my darkest moments. We started as friends, bonding over shared experiences with medical challenges and family complications. 6 months later, we're planning our own future together. The really beautiful part of this story is that I'm pregnant now, naturally, without any medical intervention. Nathan says stress can impact fertility more than people realize, and once I removed the toxic elements from my life, my body was able to do what it was meant to do. We're expecting a daughter in the spring, and I've never been happier or more at peace. I kept the house, obviously, since it was always mine. I also kept Caleb's parents, who've become like second parents to me and are excited about becoming honorary grandparents. I kept my sister's respect, which deepened when she saw how I handled the crisis with grace and strategy instead of just emotion. Most importantly, I kept my self-respect by refusing to accept a life built on lies and settling for a love that wasn't real. The lesson I learned from all of this isn't just about trusting your instincts, although that's important. It's about knowing your worth and refusing to accept anything less than you deserve. I spent 2 years trying to fix a marriage that was broken from the moment Caleb decided I wasn't enough for him. I spent energy and money and emotional resources trying to force something that was never going to work. Sometimes the worst thing that happens to you is actually the best thing that could happen to you. Losing Caleb felt like the end of my world, but it was actually the beginning of my real life. I learned that I'm stronger than I ever imagined, smarter than I gave myself credit for, and worthy of a love that doesn't require me to ignore red flags or make excuses for someone else's behavior. If this story resonates with you, if you've ever felt like something was off in your relationship or your life, please trust that feeling. Your intuition is trying to protect you. Don't ignore it because the truth might be inconvenient or painful. The truth is what sets you free to build something better. And if you've made it this far in my story, please share this video with someone who might need to hear it. Comment below if you've ever had to trust your instincts in a difficult situation. And don't forget to subscribe to this channel for more real stories about real people navigating life's unexpected challenges. Sometimes the best revenge really is living well.